I stared at the suitcase my son had shoved into my hands, the same hands that once wiped his tears, cooked his meals, and worked 2 jobs to put him through college. "Figure it out," Daniel said coldly. "I can't support a jobless mother." My heart cracked. I'd raised him alone after his father left, sacrificed everything, postponed dreams, skipped meals so he could eat. Now at 62, when I lost my library job, he kicked me out like yesterday's trash. He thought I had nothing. But my son had no idea about the multi-million-dollar fortune I'd built in secret, smart investments, property flips, the inheritance I never mentioned. As I wheeled my suitcase toward the luxury hotel downtown, one thought kept me smiling. My son kicked me out not knowing I was richer than he would ever be. I had always believed you never truly know anyone until you see them at their worst. But for me, it was when I lost my job that I finally saw my son for who he really was. "You lost your job, and you've been hiding it for how long?" Daniel's voice had that edge to it, the one I'd first noticed when he became an executive 3 years ago. His lips tightened as he stood in the doorway of the small guest room where I'd been living since he'd, generously, offered to let me move in after my apartment building was sold. "Just 2 weeks," I said, folding the library sweater I'd pretended to wear to work each day. "I was going to tell you once I found something else." "2 weeks of lying," he said, as if I'd committed some horrible crime. "2 weeks of me paying for everything while you, sat at the park." I wished I could tell him I'd spent those 2 weeks applying for 37 jobs, or that I'd been having panic attacks in the bathroom of the public library where nobody knew me. Instead, I just looked at my hands, the veins more prominent than they used to be. 62 years old and starting over wasn't what I'd planned. "I have Melissa to think about," he continued, referring to my granddaughter who was thankfully at a play date and couldn't hear her father talking to me like I was a delinquent tenant. "And Claire's stressed enough with her job. We can't afford another dependent." The word stung. Dependent. As if I hadn't been the one watching Melissa after school 4 days a week, saving them a fortune in childcare. As if I hadn't been the one cooking dinner most nights because Claire worked late. As if the $400 I contributed monthly from my part-time library salary wasn't helping at all. "Daniel, I'll find something else," I said, hating the plea in my voice. "I've got applications out already. The library just had budget cuts and—" "Mom," he interrupted, rubbing his temples like I was giving him a migraine. "You're not qualified for anything that pays enough. You've worked part-time for years. You don't even have a proper degree." "Because I was working 2 jobs while raising you alone," I wanted to say. "Because college wasn't as affordable when I was younger, and someone had to make sure you could go." "I raised you by myself," I said quietly. "I've never been afraid of hard work." Something flickered across his face. Not compassion, but impatience. That was different. The economy is different now. And frankly, I can't carry you. Not with the mortgage, Melissa's private school, and everything else. I nodded, suddenly too tired to argue. A lifetime of putting him first had led to this moment, and I couldn't even muster proper outrage. Just a hollow ache where my pride used to be. "I'll help you find a place," he said, already pulling out his phone, already solving the problem of me. "There are some senior apartments that might have openings, subsidized. You'd qualify now that you're, unemployed." Unemployed. The word he couldn't bear to attach to himself was apparently fine to hang around my neck. "I'll figure something out," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I always have." He looked up, surprised by my tone. "Mom, be realistic. You can't just—" I'll be out by tomorrow afternoon, I said, already mentally packing the few possessions I'd brought to his house. I wouldn't want to be a burden. Don't be dramatic, he sighed, but I could see the relief in his eyes. He hadn't expected me to go so easily. I'm just saying we need to be practical. Practical. The word haunted me as I packed that night after everyone had gone to bed. Practical was what I'd always been. Practical was skipping college to work when I got pregnant at 19. Practical was never telling Daniel's father that I was expecting, because he'd made it clear he wasn't staying. Practical was working 2 jobs, so Daniel could have the childhood I couldn't provide otherwise. Practical was hiding my one secret, the one thing I'd done for myself. When dawn broke, I sat at the kitchen table writing a note to Melissa, explaining that Grandma had to go away for a little while, but would see her soon. I considered leaving something for Daniel, but what was there to say that wouldn't sound bitter or broken? I left before they woke up. Claire emerged from their bedroom just as I was dragging my suitcase to the door. "Evelyn," she said, pulling her robe tighter, "what's going on?" "Ask your husband," I replied, not unkindly. Claire wasn't a bad person, just distant, always racing between work and social obligations. He can explain it his way. She frowned. "You're leaving?" "Just like that." "Just like that," I echoed, a strange calm settling over me. "Tell Melissa I love her." The morning air felt different as I wheeled my suitcase down their perfect suburban street. Lighter somehow. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Where did you go?" "We need to discuss options." I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my banking app and checked the balance I hadn't looked at in months. $4,782,956.43. The number still shocked me sometimes. Almost $5 million, accumulated quietly over 30 years. First, the inheritance from my great-aunt that I'd invested instead of spending. Then the small house I'd bought in a bad neighborhood that gentrified 10 years later, selling for 4 times what I'd paid. The careful investments made with every spare dollar, the disciplined saving, the occasional lucky stock pick. No one knew, not even Daniel, especially not Daniel, who had grown up believing we were always one paycheck away from disaster, because that was safer than telling a child we had money. By the time he was old enough to understand, the habit of secrecy was too ingrained, and I'd seen how he looked down on friends whose parents spoiled them. I flagged down a taxi at the main road. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. I smiled, feeling the weight of decades lifting from my shoulders. "The Westmont Hotel, please. The one downtown." His eyebrows rose slightly as he glanced at my modest clothes and single suitcase. The Westmont was the most expensive hotel in the city. "Special occasion?" he asked as we pulled away from the curb. I watched my son's neighborhood recede in the window. "You could say that," I replied. "I'm starting over." The Westmont Hotel stood like a gleaming sword against the city's skyline, all glass and old-world glamour. I'd driven past it hundreds of times over the years, never once imagining I would be a guest. Yet here I was wheeling my shabby suitcase across the marble floor toward the reception desk. "Good morning," said a young woman with an impeccable bun and a name tag reading May. Her eyes flickered briefly to my worn cardigan and sensible shoes before her professional smile locked back into place. "How may I assist you today?" "I'd like a room, please," I said, straightening my shoulders. "Your best available suite, actually, for at least a month." Her fingers paused over the keyboard. "A month? In the penthouse suite?" "Is it available?" I asked, already pulling out my rarely used platinum credit card. It was one of 3 cards I maintained solely to build credit, paying them off religiously each month. "It is," she said, her professionalism masking whatever surprise she felt. "The rate is $1,200 per night, with a discount for extended stays." I nodded as if this was perfectly reasonable, though the librarian in me was mentally calculating how many books that would buy. "That will be fine." 20 minutes later, May was showing me into a suite bigger than the house I'd raised Daniel in. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, including the library where I'd worked until 2 weeks ago. The living room opened to a dining area and fully stocked bar, while the bedroom featured a king-sized bed that looked like it might swallow me whole. "The bathroom has a soaking tub and separate rainfall shower," May explained, opening yet another door. "Toiletries are by L'Occitane, but if you prefer something else, we're happy to accommodate." I nodded, still stunned by the luxury surrounding me. When was the last time I'd splurged on anything? The library tote bag I'd treated myself to last Christmas? "Will someone be joining you, Miss Parker?" May asked, glancing at my single suitcase. "No," I said, then added, "just me." After she left, I sank onto the plush sofa and looked at my phone. 3 missed calls from Daniel. I turned it off and set it on the coffee table, then walked to the windows. From this height, the city looked like a miniature version of itself. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably calling me irresponsible, telling Claire I'd walked out without a plan. The same Daniel who, as a teenager, had once asked why we couldn't live in a normal house instead of our small 2-bedroom. The same Daniel who'd never known that by the time he asked that question, I already had enough in investments to buy 3 houses in our neighborhood. It had started with Aunt Mabel's inheritance when I was 25. Just $50,000. But to a single mother working at a diner and a department store, it might as well have been millions. Everyone expected me to buy a house immediately or pay off my modest debts. Instead, I met with a financial advisor who'd taken one look at my situation and seen something others missed: determination. "Most people want comfort now," he'd said. "Are you different?" I was. With a child to raise alone, I had to be. So I invested the money, kept working both jobs, and watched as the inheritance grew. When I eventually bought a small house in an up-and-coming neighborhood, I paid cash, but told everyone I had a mortgage. The difference went straight into more investments. Every step of the way, I kept my growing wealth a secret. At first, it was fear that Daniel's absent father would return wanting a share if he knew. Later, it was worry that Daniel would grow up entitled if he knew we weren't actually struggling. And finally, it was simply habit, a private security that was mine alone in a life devoted to someone else. I ordered room service that first night, a $75 steak I couldn't finish, and a $120 bottle of champagne I sipped while watching the sunset. The extravagance made me giddy and guilty in equal measure. I'd spent decades being practical, sensible Evelyn. Who was this woman ordering chocolate souffle at midnight just because she could? By the 3rd day, I'd established a routine: breakfast on my private balcony, morning walks through the upscale shopping district, occasionally purchasing something small, afternoons reading in the hotel's garden or working on my laptop in the sunlit suite. It was during one of these afternoons that I started the blog. I hadn't meant to, really. I just opened a document to journal my thoughts, something I hadn't done since Daniel was small. But the words that came were surprisingly clear, almost like I was writing to someone. "Today I'm reinventing myself," I typed. "At 62, I'm learning what freedom tastes like after decades of invisible sacrifice. They say the best revenge is living well. I'm not sure about revenge, but I'm certainly investigating the living well part. I titled it The Last Laugh, and on impulse posted it to a free blogging site. By evening, it had 17 views. By the next morning, over 100, with 3 comments asking for more. Something about the anonymous liberation of an older woman struck a chord. So I kept writing about the strange luxury of ordering whatever I wanted without checking the price. About the quiet joy of wearing silk pajamas after decades of practical cotton. About looking at myself in the bathroom mirror and seeing a woman, not just a mother, for the first time in forever. I was sitting in the hotel bar 1 week into my stay, nursing a martini and updating the blog on my tablet, when someone took the seat beside me. "The Hendricks is excellent here," said a deep voice with a slight accent I couldn't place. "Though I see you've already discovered that." I looked up to find an older man with salt and pepper hair and laugh lines around his eyes. He wore a well-tailored suit that suggested money, but not flash, the kind of subtle wealth I'd cultivated but never displayed. "First time trying it, actually," I admitted. "I'm new to martinis." "George Harrington," he said, extending his hand. "New to martinis but staying in the penthouse? You're an intriguing contradiction." I smiled, surprising myself. Evelyn Parker. And yes, I'm full of contradictions lately. "The best people are," he replied, signaling the bartender. "May I buy your next contradictory choice of beverage?" For a moment I thought of declining. I'd spent decades deflecting attention from men, focusing on work and raising Daniel. But Daniel had made it clear I wasn't needed anymore, and George's smile held no pressure, just genuine interest. "Yes," I said, "you may." Later that evening, I returned to my suite and added a new post to The Last Laugh. Today, I said yes instead of no. I'm discovering that's a powerful thing for a woman who spent her life saying no to herself. No to new clothes, no to vacations, no to dating, no to anything that wasn't practical. But practicality never kept anyone warm at night, and I'm tired of being cold. By morning, the post had over 1,000 views. I bought my first designer dress on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks into my stay at the Westmont. It wasn't planned. I'd simply walked past a boutique where the emerald silk caught my eye, much like a bird might be drawn to something shiny. The saleswoman approached as I lingered by the window. "It would suit you," she said, not in the practiced way of someone making a commission, but with genuine assessment. "With your coloring, it would be stunning." An hour later, I walked out with the dress and matching heels that cost more than a month's rent in my old apartment. I didn't need them. I had nowhere to wear them. But for the first time in decades, I bought something simply because it gave me joy. That evening, I wore the dress to dinner alone in the hotel restaurant, not waiting for anyone, not celebrating anything in particular, just a woman enjoying a good meal in a beautiful dress. "You look radiant tonight, Miss Parker," May said as I passed through the lobby. After 3 weeks, she'd stopped looking surprised to see me and had begun treating me with the deference reserved for the hotel's wealthiest guests. "Thank you, May," I said, noticing how differently I carried myself in clothes that weren't chosen for durability or practicality. I decided it was time for something new. The maître d' seated me at a prime table near the window. As I studied the menu, I caught my reflection in the glass. The woman looking back at me seemed both familiar and foreign, like meeting a cousin who shares your features but lived a different life. I ordered the chef's tasting menu with wine pairings, something I would have dismissed as wasteful just a month ago. Between courses, I people-watched, imagining stories for the other diners. The young couple, clearly on a first date, The businessmen closing a deal, the family celebrating some milestone. None of them glanced twice at the older woman dining alone. I was invisible in the way all women of a certain age become invisible, but it no longer bothered me. There was power in being underestimated. "Excuse me," said a voice, interrupting my thoughts. I looked up to find a woman about my age, elegantly dressed with a scarf tied artfully around her neck. "I hope I'm not intruding, but I must ask where you found that magnificent dress." "Larimer Boutique, just down the street," I replied, surprised by the question. "I knew it," she said with satisfaction. "Sophia has an eye like no other. I'm Helen, by the way. Would you mind if I joined you? My dinner companion canceled, and eating alone is so tedious." Before I could decide if I minded, Helen was settling into the chair across from me, signaling a waiter. "I'm Evelyn," I said, finding myself oddly pleased by the interruption. When was the last time I'd made a new friend? All my social connections had been through Daniel or the library, people who knew me only as someone's mother or the quiet woman who recommended books. Helen proved to be a delightful dinner companion, a retired art professor with acerbic opinions on everything from the wine list to current politics. By dessert, we were laughing like old friends. "You must join us for the chamber music tomorrow," she insisted as we parted in the lobby. Small group, mostly arts patrons, very casual. Well, as casual as chamber music ever gets. I surprised myself by agreeing. The next evening found me in Helen's elegant apartment 10 floors below my suite, being introduced to a circle of her friends. Among them was Sophia, the boutique owner who'd sold me the green dress. "Ah, my emerald creation found its perfect home," she said, kissing my cheeks, European style. "Helen said you wore it to dine alone. Brava! Most women wait for permission to wear beautiful things." The chamber music was lovely, but the conversation afterward was better. These were people who had lived full lives, cultivated interests, traveled extensively. No one asked about my children or grandchildren. No one defined me by my relationship to others. They simply accepted me as I presented myself. Evelyn, a woman with her own thoughts and tastes. "You should come to my studio," Sophia said, as the evening wound down. "I'm hosting life drawing sessions on Thursdays. No experience necessary, just appreciation for the human form." Life drawing meant nude models. 2 months ago, I would have blushed and declined. Instead, I heard myself saying, "I'd love to." The next morning, I updated the Last Laugh blog, which now had over 5,000 followers. Yesterday, I realized I've spent my life watching from the edges, applauding others while thinking my own turn would come someday. At 62, I'm learning someday only comes when you claim it for yourself. George called that afternoon, inviting me to the symphony. We'd seen each other several times since our first meeting in the bar, each encounter ending with a gentlemanly handshake or brief kiss on the cheek. I liked his calm demeanor, the way he listened when I spoke, and how he never tried to impress me with displays of wealth or status. "The symphony sounds wonderful," I told him. "I haven't been in years." "I remember you mentioned Dvorak was a favorite," he said. "They're performing his New World Symphony." The fact that he'd remembered such a detail from our conversations made something flutter in my chest. It had been so long since anyone had truly listened to me. The symphony was magnificent. George's hand found mine during the second movement, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. I couldn't remember the last time I'd been touched with such tender attention. Afterward, we walked through the night-cooled city, talking about everything and nothing, about books we'd loved, places we hoped to visit, small joys that made life worthwhile. "May I kiss you good night, Evelyn?" he asked as we reached the hotel entrance. The doorman pretended not to watch as I said yes and tilted my face up to George's. The kiss was gentle, unhurried, a question rather than a demand. When it ended, I found myself smiling like the young woman I'd once been, before responsibility and sacrifice had hardened the edges of my heart. "I'll call you tomorrow," George promised, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I floated back to my suite, feeling lighter than I had in decades. In the bathroom mirror, I studied my reflection, noticing how my eyes seemed brighter, my posture more confident. The expensive face cream I'd started using had softened some lines, but others remained, mapping a life lived. For the first time, I didn't wish them away. My phone buzzed with a text message. I expected George, but saw Daniel's name instead. After weeks of ignored calls, he'd finally resorted to texting, "Mom, we need to talk. This silent treatment is childish. Where are you staying?" I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and began typing a new blog entry. Today, I was kissed beneath the stars by a man who sees me, not as a mother or grandmother or former anything, but as a woman fully present in her prime. It occurs to me that all my life, I've been waiting for permission to be the heroine of my own story. No more waiting, no more permission needed. I posted it, closed the laptop, and slept more peacefully than I had in years. 2 months into my new life at the Westmont, I was having breakfast on my balcony when May called up from the front desk. "Miss Parker, I have a Claire Williams asking for you. She claims to be your daughter-in-law. Shall I send her up?" I hesitated, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. I hadn't spoken to Daniel or his family since the day I left. "Yes, please do," I finally said. It was time to face at least one of them. Claire arrived 5 minutes later, her professional exterior cracking slightly, as she took in the penthouse suite. Her eyes widened at the fresh flowers, the plush furnishings, the breathtaking view. "Evelyn," she said, accepting my offer of coffee with a distracted nod. "This is where you've been staying. How are you affording this?" "I have my resources," I said simply, pouring her a cup. "Is everything all right? Is Melissa okay?" Claire's perfect composure faltered. "Melissa is fine physically, but she misses you terribly, and things at home are strained." I waited, sensing there was more. "Daniel lost his job," she blurted out, setting down her untouched coffee. 3 weeks ago. He didn't want me to tell you." The irony wasn't lost on me. "What happened?" Claire twisted her wedding ring nervously. "They're calling it downsizing, but there are rumors. Something about financial improprieties in his department. He swears he wasn't involved, but his boss was definitely cooking the books, and Daniel signed off on reports without checking them properly." I absorbed this information, surprised by my lack of satisfaction. I'd imagined I might feel vindicated if Daniel ever faced the same situation. He judged me for so harshly. Instead, I felt a complicated mix of concern and resignation. "He's been impossible to live with," Claire continued, looking exhausted. "Angry all the time, drinking too much. We had a huge fight last night, and I told him I was taking Melissa to my mother's for a while." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Whatever my issues with Daniel, I never wanted Melissa caught in the crossfire. "The thing is," Claire said, meeting my eyes directly, "Melissa's private school sent a notice that her tuition for next semester has been paid in full. We assumed it was some kind of mistake, but they insisted it was an anonymous donation earmarked specifically for her." I kept my expression neutral, though my heart raced. I'd arranged the payment through a lawyer, careful to maintain my anonymity. Melissa shouldn't suffer because of adult problems. That's fortunate, I said carefully. Claire studied me with new awareness. It was you, wasn't it? Which means you have money, significant money. I neither confirmed nor denied it. What do you want, Claire? She sighed, suddenly looking younger and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. Honestly, advice. You raised Daniel alone. You must have faced tough times. How did you handle it? The question caught me off guard. Claire had always maintained a polite distance, treating me more like a convenient babysitter than family. I put one foot in front of the other, I said after a moment. And I reminded myself that hard times pass, even when it doesn't feel like they will. Claire nodded slowly. Daniel wants to sell the house, says we can't afford it anymore. But it feels like giving up. Sometimes a fresh start isn't giving up, I said gently. It's just starting fresh. She glanced around the luxurious suite. Like you did? I smiled. My circumstances are unique. We talked for another hour, not as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, but as two women navigating complicated lives. By the time she left, something had shifted between us. Not friendship exactly, but mutual respect. Melissa's birthday is next Saturday, Claire said at the door. She'd love to see you. I'll be there, I promised. After she left, I checked my blog. The Last Laugh had grown beyond anything I'd imagined, with over 50,000 followers now. Women from around the world commented on my posts, sharing their own stories of reinvention and second chances. Some media outlets had started referencing it as a phenomenon of women reclaiming their power later in life. I began typing a new entry. Today I was reminded that no matter how far we travel from our old lives, threads still connect us to the people we once centered our world around. The question becomes, do we cut those threads or weave them into something new? My phone rang as I finished posting. It was George, calling to confirm our dinner plans. We'd been seeing each other regularly, our relationship deepening with each encounter. Last week, he'd asked if I would consider accompanying him to Spain next month, where he had business interests. I'm afraid I have to cancel tonight, I told him. Family matters have come up. Anything I can help with? He asked, his voice warm with concern. Just being you helps, I said, surprised by my own candor. But I need to handle this one alone. That evening, I called my lawyer and arranged for a discreet investigation into Daniel's work situation. If he was truly innocent of wrongdoing, perhaps I could help clear his name. If not, he would have to face the consequences. But I could ensure Melissa was protected. The following Saturday, I arrived at Daniel's house for Melissa's birthday party, driving the modest sedan I'd purchased rather than taking a taxi. I'd deliberately dressed down in simple slacks and a blouse, not wanting to flaunt my changed circumstances. Melissa spotted me first, racing across the lawn with a squeal of delight. "Grandma, you came!" I hugged her tightly, inhaling the scent of sunshine and birthday cake in her hair. Of course I did. I wouldn't miss your special day. Over her shoulder, I caught sight of Daniel emerging from the house. He looked thinner. The confident set of his shoulders diminished. For a moment, I saw echoes of the little boy who'd once clung to my hand on his first day of school, terrified but trying to be brave. Our eyes met across the yard. His widened at the sight of me, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face. Resentment, relief, confusion, pride. And in that moment, I realized the revenge fantasy I'd briefly entertained when he first threw me out had never truly taken root in my heart. What would be the point? The son who dismissed me so easily was already experiencing his own reckoning. Adding to his pain wouldn't heal mine. "Mom," he said stiffly, as I approached with Melissa still attached to my side. "You look well." "So do you," I lied politely. An awkward silence fell between us, 2 decades of unspoken words hanging in the air. "Grandma, come see my new bike." Melissa tugged at my hand, rescuing us both. I smiled at my granddaughter, allowing her to lead me away. "I'd love to, sweetheart." Later, as children played and adults made small talk around the cake table, Claire approached me. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "It means everything to Melissa." I nodded, watching Daniel across the yard. He stood alone, nursing a drink, looking lost in his own home. "Has he been looking for work?" I asked. Claire sighed. "Trying to, but with the rumors, it's difficult, and his pride is making it worse." I understood pride. It had kept me silent about my fortune for decades. It had made me pretend to go to work at a job I'd already lost. "Sometimes pride is all we have," I said softly, "until we realize it's actually costing us everything." I didn't speak directly with Daniel at Melissa's party, but his eyes followed me throughout the afternoon. When it was time to leave, I presented Melissa with her gift, a delicate silver locket containing a small photograph of the 2 of us from last Christmas. "So you'll always have me close," I told her as she threw her arms around my neck. "Will you come back home soon, Grandma?" she asked, her voice muffled against my shoulder. I glanced up to find Daniel watching us, his expression unreadable. "I'm making a new home now," I said gently, "but that doesn't mean I won't see you. In fact, how would you like to visit me next weekend? If it's okay with your parents?" Claire, overhearing, nodded her approval. Daniel turned away, disappearing back into the house. The following Thursday, I received an unexpected email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Are you the last laugh?" My blog had remained anonymous, with no personal details that could identify me. I'd been careful about that, wanting the freedom to write honestly without consequences in my real life. Yet someone had connected the dots. The email was from a literary agent who had been following my blog. She believed my story could make an impactful memoir and wanted to discuss representation. I stared at the message for a long time, wondering what it would mean to step out from behind the anonymity that had protected me. That evening, I discussed it with George over dinner in my suite. We'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm, spending several evenings a week together, sometimes going out, sometimes enjoying private meals prepared by the hotel's chef. "The question isn't whether you could write a compelling memoir," George said, refilling my wine glass. "Clearly you can. The question is whether you want to." I sighed, leaning back into the plush dining chair. I started the blog as a way to process what happened with Daniel. I never expected it to resonate with so many women. Yet it has, George pointed out. Perhaps because you're giving voice to an experience many share but few discuss openly. The invisible middle-aged woman who surprises everyone by refusing to remain invisible. I smiled at his insight. "Is that how you see me? Refusing to be invisible?" George reached across the table, taking my hand. "I see you as extraordinary, a woman of depth and grace who is finally allowing herself to live fully." The warmth in his eyes made me feel both vulnerable and powerful. Over the past months, George had become more than a romantic interest. He'd become a confidant, someone who saw me clearly without the distorting lens of past roles and expectations. "What do you want to leave behind, Evelyn?" he asked, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "When all is said and done, what mark do you want to make on this world?" The question lingered in my mind long after George had gone. What did I want my legacy to be? For decades, I'd poured everything into being Daniel's mother. I'd measured my success by his achievements, my worth by his well-being. But he was an adult now, making his own choices, living with the consequences. What was left for me? The answer came to me in the pre-dawn hours. I opened my laptop and began to write. Not a blog post this time, but the outline for something larger. By morning, I had the framework for a foundation dedicated to supporting single mothers in career transitions, providing not just financial assistance, but mentorship, education, and a supportive community. I would call it Second Chapter and fund it with a significant portion of my fortune. It would be my way of turning personal pain into something meaningful, helping women who were where I had once been, struggling to balance caregiving with survival. With new purpose, I contacted my financial advisor and the lawyer who had handled the private investigation into Daniel's work situation. That investigation had confirmed what Claire suspected. Daniel's boss had been engaging in financial impropriety, and while Daniel hadn't actively participated, he had been negligent in his oversight, signing off on reports without proper scrutiny. I'd like to set up a foundation, I told my advisor, and I'd like to remain anonymous for now, at least as the primary donor. Over the next 2 weeks, I immersed myself in creating Second Chapter. I researched similar organizations, consulted with nonprofit experts, and drafted a mission statement. In between, I spent time with Melissa, who delighted in visiting my fancy hotel house and swimming in the rooftop pool. "Dad says you must have won the lottery," she mentioned innocently during one visit, licking ice cream from a silver spoon. "Did you?" "Something like that," I replied, unwilling to lie to her, but not ready to explain the whole truth. "I made some good choices a long time ago that are helping me now." Melissa nodded sagely. "Dad says he made bad choices. That's why he's sad all the time." My heart twisted at her perception. "Everyone makes mistakes, sweetheart. The important thing is learning from them." "Will Daddy learn?" she asked, her eyes wide with the simple faith of childhood. "I hope so," I said honestly. That evening, after Melissa had been picked up by Claire, I received another email. This one was from a reporter at a major women's magazine who had connected me to the Last Laugh blog through the literary agent I'd been in discussions with. "Your story is resonating deeply with our readers," the email read. "We'd like to feature you in our Women Redefining Midlife issue. Would you be willing to share your journey with us?" I closed the laptop without responding. Was I ready to step fully into public view? To claim my story so openly? There would be no turning back once I did. Daniel would learn the truth about my finances, as would everyone else from my old life. Yet something had shifted within me. The fear that had kept me silent for so long had diminished. In its place was a growing certainty that my story might help others find their own courage. I called George, who had become my sounding board for important decisions. "The magazine wants to interview me," I explained. "About the blog, about everything." "And what do you want?" he asked, as he always did. "I want to stop hiding," I said, surprised by the firmness in my voice. "I've spent most of my life being cautious, putting others first, keeping secrets to protect feelings that weren't mine. I'm tired of it." "Then don't hide," he said simply. "Stand in your truth, Evelyn. It suits you." I agreed to the interview, with one condition. It would take place after the official launch of Second Chapter. I wanted that to be part of my story, too, not just where I'd come from, but where I was going. The launch event was scheduled for the first weekend in October, to be held in the grand ballroom of the Westmont. I hired an event planner, approved a guest list of influential women in business and philanthropy, and worked with a designer on materials that explained the foundation's mission without revealing me as its primary benefactor. 2 days before the event, I received a text from Claire. "Daniel found the article about your blog. He knows everything." I was reviewing the seating chart for the second chapter launch when my phone rang. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. After months of ignored calls when I first left, he had stopped trying to reach me directly, communicating only through Claire when necessary about Melissa's visits. Now, here he was again. I answered with a calmness I didn't entirely feel. "Hello, Daniel. Were you ever going to tell me?" His voice was tight with anger. Or was I just supposed to find out from some magazine article that my mother is a multimillionaire who's been lying to me my entire life? I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. The article wasn't supposed to be published until after the foundation launch. Someone had obviously leaked an advance copy. I wasn't lying, Daniel. I was private about my finances. There's a difference. Private? He gave a harsh laugh. You let me believe we were struggling. You worked jobs you didn't need, lived in a house that was beneath you, drove cars that were practically falling apart. Why? To teach me some twisted lesson about privilege? No, I said firmly. I did it to give you a normal childhood, to raise a son who valued work and didn't expect everything to be handed to him. Well, congratulations, he snapped. Mission accomplished. I valued work so much I neglected my wife and daughter for it. I pushed myself to the breaking point trying to provide a life I thought you never had, and all along you were sitting on millions. The bitter irony in his voice cut me deeply. Had I made a mistake? Had my well-intentioned secret actually harmed him in ways I never anticipated? I'm sorry if my choices hurt you, I said quietly. That was never my intention. Your choices? He sounded incredulous. What about when I was struggling to pay for college and working 3 part-time jobs? Or when Claire needed surgery and we went into debt to cover what insurance wouldn't? Were those good times to keep your secret? Each example landed like a blow. I had helped with his college expenses, but always within what would seem reasonable for my librarian's salary. I hadn't known about Claire's surgery. He'd never mentioned it. You never asked for help, I pointed out. You made it clear you wanted to handle things yourself, because I thought you didn't have it to give. His voice cracked slightly. God, Mom, do you have any idea what it feels like to find out your whole understanding of your childhood was a lie? I thought of my own parents, how they had struggled openly, never hiding their financial stress from me, how that knowledge had shaped me, made me determined to build security for myself and my child. Had I overcorrected in my parenting, gone too far in the opposite direction? I need to see you, I said finally. We should have this conversation face to face. There was a long pause. Fine, he said eventually. When? Come to the hotel tonight. He agreed, and I spent the hours before his arrival in a state of nervous anticipation. I asked the hotel to prepare a simple dinner in my suite, nothing ostentatious that might further trigger his resentment. George called to wish me luck, offering to be present for moral support, but this was a conversation Daniel and I needed to have alone. Daniel arrived precisely at 7, his face set in hard lines I barely recognized. The confident executive was gone, replaced by someone more raw, more vulnerable, yet paradoxically more closed off. He surveyed the penthouse with critical eyes. Nice place, he said flatly. Very different from where you raised me. I gestured toward the dining table where our meal waited. Let's sit down. We have a lot to talk about. Over dinner, I told him everything. about Aunt Mabel's inheritance and the financial advisor who helped me invest it wisely, about buying the small house in a neighborhood on the verge of gentrification and selling it for quadruple the price years later, about the careful, consistent investing strategy that had grown my wealth steadily over decades. But why keep it secret? He asked, his anger giving way to genuine confusion. Especially after I was an adult. I considered my answer carefully. At first, it was protection. I didn't want your father coming back demanding a share if he learned about the inheritance. Then it became about protecting you from expectations and entitlement. And eventually, it was just habit. The longer I kept the secret, the harder it became to reveal it. Daniel pushed his barely touched food around his plate. So the whole time I was telling you to be practical about losing your job, looking into subsidized senior housing, you were worth millions? Yes. He shook his head, a bitter smile twisting his lips. And then I kicked you out. God, the irony. You didn't kick me out, I said softly. You pushed me forward. If you hadn't, I might never have started living for myself. He looked up sharply. Is that supposed to make me feel better? That treating you like garbage did you a favor? No, I said. How you treated me was wrong regardless of my financial situation, but what came after has been transformative for me. The blog, the foundation, finding my voice, finding George. Who's George? I smiled slightly. Someone very important to me. You'll meet him at the foundation launch if you come. Daniel's eyebrows rose. You're inviting me? After everything? You're my son, I said simply. Nothing changes that. But I need you to understand something, Daniel. This is my world now, my creation, my purpose. If you want to be part of it, you need to step into it with humility. He was silent for a long moment, studying me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. You've changed, he finally said. I've become more fully myself, I corrected gently. There's a difference. And the foundation? What's it for? I explained the mission of second chapter, watching his expression shift from skepticism to reluctant understanding. So it's for women like you were, single mothers trying to build careers while raising children. Yes, but with support I never had, financial assistance, mentorship, community, and with a strong emphasis on planning for their future security, not just immediate needs. Daniel nodded slowly. It's a good idea. Claire said you've been different with Melissa lately, more present, more engaged. I'm trying to be the grandmother she deserves, not just the grandmother I thought I should be. As the evening drew to a close, something had shifted between us. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but the beginning of understanding. Daniel paused at the door. I'm not proud of how I reacted when you lost your job, he said, looking at the floor rather than meeting my eyes. I was stressed about money, about work, about a lot of things, but that's no excuse. No, I agreed. It's not, but it's a starting point for moving forward. He nodded once, then left. I watched from my window as he crossed the street below, his shoulders less rigid than when he'd arrived. We had taken a small step toward healing, though the path ahead remained uncertain. The next morning, I received a text from him. I'll be at the launch, Claire too, if the invitation still stands. I smiled as I typed my response. It does. This is my world now. Step into it with humility, or don't step in at all. His reply came quickly. I'll try to make you proud. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to hope that someday we might find our way back to truly being mother and son again. but this time as equals, each respecting the other's full humanity. The morning of the second chapter foundation gala arrived with perfect autumn clarity. I stood at my penthouse window watching the city come alive, feeling oddly calm despite the significance of the day. 6 months ago, I'd been packing a single suitcase, leaving my son's home with no clear destination. Now I was preparing to publicly launch a foundation that would help hundreds of women rebuild their lives. My phone chimed with a text from George. "Breakfast before the chaos begins?" We met in the hotel's private dining room, where he presented me with a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver pendant, a perfect match for the locket I'd given Melissa. "So you'll always have her close," he said, echoing my words to my granddaughter. "And a reminder of how far you've come." I blinked back unexpected tears as he fastened it around my neck. "Thank you. For this, and for everything these past months." George's steady presence had become my anchor in this new life. Unlike most men I'd known, he seemed genuinely delighted by my growing independence and success, never threatened by it. "Nervous about tonight?" he asked, pouring coffee for us both. "Less than I expected," I admitted. "More excited than afraid." "As you should be. What you've created is remarkable, Evelyn. Not just the foundation, but this whole new chapter of your life." I smiled, thinking of how much had changed. I keep wondering what would have happened if Daniel hadn't told me to leave that day. Would I still be there, making myself small to fit into someone else's life? "I prefer not to think about that alternative universe," George said, reaching for my hand. "I rather like this one, with you exactly as you are." The rest of the day passed in a blur of final preparations. The hotel ballroom had been transformed with elegant but understated decor, centered around the second chapter logo I'd helped design. Information packets waited at each seat, explaining the foundation's mission and programs without revealing me as its primary benefactor. That would change tonight, when I would publicly claim my role. My new friend Sophia had designed a gown specifically for the occasion, a midnight blue creation that made me feel both powerful and feminine. As I dressed, I thought about the woman I'd been and the woman I'd become. Not so much changed as expanded, like a bird finally stretching wings it hadn't known it possessed. The first guests began arriving at 7. I greeted them from a small receiving line, George at my side, introducing myself simply as Evelyn Parker, founder of Second Chapter. Many were prominent women in business and philanthropy, whom I'd never have had access to in my previous life. Others were potential program participants, single mothers selected by the team of social workers I'd hired to help develop our criteria. At 7:30, I spotted Daniel and Claire entering the ballroom. They paused at the entrance, taking in the elegant scene. Claire looked lovely in a simple black dress, but it was Daniel who caught my attention. He'd lost the haggard look I'd noticed at Melissa's party, and though still thinner than before, he stood straighter, his expression open rather than guarded. I excused myself from the couple I'd been speaking with and crossed the room to greet them. "You came," I said, unable to keep the pleasure from my voice. "We said we would," Daniel replied, his eyes taking in everything, from my gown to the crowded room of influential people. "This is impressive, Mom." "Thank you," I said, then turned to Claire. "You look beautiful. Is Melissa with your mother?" Claire nodded. "She wanted to come, but we thought it best for her to skip the formal parts. Maybe next time." Next time. The simple phrase carried so much hope. "I want you to meet someone," I said, scanning the room for George. I spotted him chatting with the mayor and waved him over. George approached with his characteristic easy confidence, extending his hand to Daniel. "You must be Evelyn's son. I've heard a great deal about you." Daniel looked momentarily startled, perhaps by George's warmth, or perhaps by the realization that I had a life he knew nothing about. "All bad, I assume," he said, with a self-deprecating smile. "On the contrary," George replied. "Evelyn speaks of you with great pride. Your business acumen, your dedication to your daughter. She's particularly impressed with how you're handling recent challenges." I shot George a grateful look. He'd found exactly the right note, acknowledging the difficulties without dwelling on them, offering Daniel a glimpse of how I spoke about him when he wasn't present. Before Daniel could respond, the event coordinator signaled that it was time for me to take the stage. I squeezed George's hand, nodded to Daniel and Claire, and made my way to the podium. The room fell silent as I adjusted the microphone. Hundreds of faces turned expectantly toward me, many belonging to people who had only known me through my anonymous blog until now. "Good evening," I began, my voice steadier than I'd feared it might be. "My name is Evelyn Parker, and I am the founder of Second Chapter Foundation. I'm also the woman some of you may know as the Last Laugh." A ripple of recognition moved through the crowd. 6 months ago, I found myself at a crossroads. After decades of putting everyone else first, I was suddenly alone, starting over at 62. It was terrifying, and it was the greatest gift I've ever received. I shared my story, not the detailed version I'd given Daniel, but the emotional truth of it. The fear of beginning again, the joy of discovering my own strength, the power of reinvention, at an age when women are often considered past their prime. Second Chapter exists because no woman should have to choose between caring for her children and building her future, I explained. Our programs provide financial support, professional mentoring, and community to single mothers navigating career transitions. We believe that every woman deserves not just to survive, but to thrive, to create wealth, security, and meaning on her own terms. As I outlined the Foundation's 3 core programs, I caught sight of Daniel in the crowd. He was listening intently, his expression thoughtful. Claire stood beside him, nodding at points that resonated. "I'm funding Second Chapter primarily through my own resources," I continued. "Resources I built slowly and carefully over many decades. But tonight, I'm asking you to join me. Not just with financial contributions, though those are certainly welcome, but with your expertise, your networks, your compassion." The applause when I finished was thunderous. As I stepped away from the podium, women approached from all directions, some to offer support, others to share their own stories of reinvention. I spoke with each one briefly, promising deeper conversations in the days to come. When the crowd finally thinned, I found Daniel waiting at the edge of the stage. "You were amazing up there," he said, his voice thick with emotion I couldn't quite identify. "I've never seen you like that before. So confident, so powerful." "I've never felt like this before," I admitted, "like I'm finally living the life I was meant for." He swallowed hard. "I want to apologize, not just for kicking you out, but for never seeing you, really seeing you as a person with dreams and potential beyond being my mother." Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back. "We both made mistakes, Daniel. Me with my secrets, you with your judgment. But tonight isn't about the past. It's about what comes next." He nodded, looking around at the successful event in full swing. "You've created something incredible here, Mom. Something that will help so many women." "Thank you," I said, genuinely moved by his recognition. That means more than you know. Later, as the gala wound down, George gave a surprise toast that left me blinking back tears again. To the women who rebuild in silence, he said, raising his glass, who nurture others while deferring their own dreams, who face rejection and abandonment with dignity and grace, and who demonstrate that the most powerful act of all is choosing yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of the profound understanding that you cannot truly give to others until you honor your own worth. As glasses clinked around the room, I caught Daniel's eye. He raised his glass to me, a gesture of respect that meant more than any spoken apology. The evening ended with promises of funding, partnerships, and media coverage that would help Second Chapter reach even more women. As the last guest departed, I kicked off my heels and sank onto a chair beside George. "Well," he said, taking my hand, "I'd say that was a success." I smiled, feeling a bone-deep satisfaction I'd never experienced before. It was perfect. "What's next for the formidable Evelyn Parker?" he asked, a twinkle in his eye. I leaned my head against his shoulder. "Right now, a very large glass of champagne and at least 12 hours of sleep. After that, I think I'm just getting started." 1 year after the launch of Second Chapter, I stood in the community center watching Daniel lead a financial literacy workshop for single mothers. His voice carried across the room with confidence as he explained investment basics in simple, accessible terms. The women leaned forward, engaged by his respectful approach and practical advice. "Start small," he was saying. "Even $20 a month can grow into something meaningful over time. The key is consistency and patience." I smiled, recognizing the echo of lessons I'd finally shared with him about how I'd built my own fortune. After losing his executive position, Daniel had struggled to find equivalent work. His pride had initially prevented him from accepting my offer to join Second Chapter. But when I suggested he volunteer while continuing his job search, he'd reluctantly agreed. That reluctance had transformed over months into genuine passion. He'd discovered a talent for explaining complex financial concepts to people without business backgrounds, and the single mothers in our program responded to him with trust I hadn't expected. Perhaps they sensed his own humbling, how his fall from corporate success had softened his edges. "Miss Parker?" A young woman touched my arm, drawing my attention from Daniel's workshop. "The film crew is ready for your interview whenever you are." I nodded, following her to the office we'd set aside for the documentary team. The Last Laugh memoir had been published 3 months earlier, to critical acclaim and surprising commercial success. Now a filmmaker was creating a documentary about Second Chapter, featuring stories of women who had rebuilt their lives with the Foundation's help. "Evelyn, wonderful," said the director, rising to greet me. "We just need about 30 minutes for the final interview segment. Then we'll get some B-roll of you interacting with the program participants." As I settled into the chair, adjusting the microphone clipped to my blouse, I caught sight of my reflection in the camera lens. At 63, I looked more vibrant than I had at 50. Not younger exactly, but more present, more alive in my own skin. The interview questions focused on the Foundation's remarkable first year. We had helped over 200 women, providing everything from emergency housing assistance to business startup grants. Our mentorship program paired established professionals with mothers seeking to change careers or return to work after raising children. The success stories were already beginning to accumulate. Women moving from crisis to stability, from stability to growth. How has your relationship with your son evolved since he began working with the foundation? The director asked, moving into more personal territory. I considered the question carefully. We're healing, I said simply. Learning to see each other as whole people, not just as mother and son with all the expectations those roles carry. Working together has given us common ground that isn't burdened by our past. After the interview, I rejoined the main room where Daniel was wrapping up his workshop. Claire sat at the back, having recently begun volunteering as well. Their marriage had survived its crisis, though not without changes. They'd sold their too expensive house and moved to a comfortable apartment. Claire had taken a promotion that required more travel, but brought greater fulfillment, while Daniel had gradually accepted that his corporate career might be behind him. "Grandma," Melissa called, spotting me from the children's area where she was reading to younger kids. At 9, she had appointed herself the junior assistant of second chapter, taking her role with endearing seriousness. I waved, then turned as my phone vibrated with a text from George. He was waiting outside to drive me to a speaking engagement at the university. After a year of dividing our time between his home and my suite at the Westmont, we had recently begun discussing more permanent arrangements. Not marriage necessarily, but a shared life that honored both our independence and our connection. As the workshop participants gathered their materials, a woman approached me. I recognized her from the intake interviews several months earlier, a former teacher with 3 children who had fled an abusive marriage with nothing but her car and whatever would fit in it. "Miss Parker," she said, extending her hand, "I wanted to thank you personally before I leave. I start my new job on Monday." "Angela, that's wonderful news," I said, genuinely delighted. The school position came through. She nodded, her eyes bright. "Assistant principal. I never thought I'd work in education again, let alone in administration. Your foundation made it possible, not just the credential funding, but believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." "You did the hard work," I reminded her. "We just provided tools." "Tools and hope," she said firmly. "When I grow up, I want to be like you." The phrase struck me with unexpected force. They were the exact words Melissa had used in the card she gave me after I'd started over. Words that had seemed sweet, but inconsequential at the time. Now, hearing them from this capable woman rebuilding her life, they carried the weight of real impact. Daniel approached as Angela moved away. "Good workshop," I said, meaning it. He nodded, looking pleased but not arrogant as he once might have. "They're so hungry for information no one ever taught them. Things I took for granted growing up, even when I thought we were struggling." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. His belief that we'd been financially precarious had made him more knowledgeable about money than many of his privileged peers, a knowledge he was now passing on to women who truly needed it. "Mom," he said, more hesitant now, "I've been thinking about something. What would you think about me taking a formal role with the foundation? Director of Financial Education, maybe?" I studied him, seeing both the boy I'd raised and the man he was becoming. "Are you sure? It's different from the corporate world. Less prestige, less money. More meaning," he countered. "More direct impact. I can actually see the difference I'm making here." Pride swelled in my chest, not the complicated maternal pride I'd once felt for his achievements, but a simpler appreciation for his growth as a human being. "I think that's a wonderful idea. We'll need to create a proper job description, interview process." "Of course," he agreed quickly. "No nepotism. I want to earn the position." Outside, I spotted George waiting patiently in his car. Daniel followed my gaze and smiled. He's good for you. I've never seen you so happy. I am happy, I said, realizing the simple truth of it. Not because of George, though he adds to it, but because I finally understand that my life is my own. Better late than never, Daniel said, then paused. I keep thinking about what you said that night at the hotel, that I didn't kick you out. I pushed you forward. I nodded, remembering. I was so angry when you said that, he continued. But you were right. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to us becomes the best thing for us. Only if we choose to make it so, I said gently. As we walked together toward the exit, I thought about the journey of the past 18 months. The humiliation of being dismissed from my son's home had become the catalyst for a life more authentic and impactful than I could have imagined. The secret fortune I'd built in silence had become a force for change in hundreds of women's lives. George smiled as he saw us approach, getting out to open the car door. "How was your day, remarkable woman?" he asked, kissing my cheek. "Productive," I replied, squeezing Daniel's arm before stepping toward the car. "Very productive." Later that evening, after my speech at the university, George and I walked along the riverfront. The city lights reflected in the water, creating parallel worlds of illumination above and below. "I heard from the publisher today," I told him. "They want a second book, stories of the women we've helped, along with practical advice for starting over at any age." "You'll do it, of course," he said. It wasn't a question. "I will. Their stories deserve to be told." We stopped at a bench overlooking the water. The night was mild, perfect for contemplation. "A year ago, I thought my life was ending," I mused. "Now I can't imagine fitting everything in. The foundation, the speaking engagements, the book, us. Sometimes I wish I'd found this version of myself decades ago." George took my hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on my palm. "Everything in its right time, Evelyn. You needed to be exactly who you were than to become who you are now." I nodded, leaning against his solid presence. "He threw me out like I had nothing," I said softly. "But he gave me everything, the push I needed to finally become myself." As we sat together watching the flowing river, I felt a completeness I'd never known before, not because everything was perfect or resolved, but because I had finally claimed the authorship of my own story. The last laugh wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about the quiet triumph of becoming utterly, authentically yourself, no matter how long the journey takes.